Between 1939 and 1940, Hitler crushed Europe. Then he launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. On September 6, 1941, Hitler issues his Directive Number 35 under the codename Typhoon, the attack on Moscow. Like all Germans, Hans Bauer, Hitler's personal pilot, is confident. No doubt about it. The Wehrmacht will defeat the Russian army. The Führer will defeat the Red Tsar. This will be the decisive fight. After 3 months of fighting, the German advance on the 3 axes of attack has made its way inside Russia. Leningrad is surrounded. Moscow is threatened. In the south, Kharkiv, the major Ukrainian city, is under siege. In Kharkiv, the 6th German Army, whose objective is further away, first Stalingrad, then Baku for oil, encounters fierce Russian resistance. The Red Army has already lost 3 million soldiers. Yet miraculously, it keeps up the fight. For Hitler, passing through his chalet in the Bavarian Alps, the Berghof, these are only the last battles before the final victory. Eva Braun, his hidden mistress, his guests, and the immense majority of Germans believe that Hitler has always been successful and that he will continue to succeed. He is a charming, gallant man, and no one suspects or wants to suspect the horrors committed under his orders since the beginning of the invasion, such as the massacre of the Jews. Who dares say a word? Only in the privacy of the home will a German soldier, returning on leave, speak of his war. Families discover that their husbands, fathers, and sons are following criminal orders on the Eastern Front. Soldiers tell of the unleashing of anti-Semitism in Ukraine, legitimized by Hitler. The malaise makes its way up the ladder. Hitler's generals believe that it may damage the morale of both the troops and the German people. Additionally, the execution of civilians, of women and children, in what is known today as the Holocaust by bullets, use up too much ammunition. Chief Executioner Heinrich Himmler has commissioned designs for death factories. Nazi engineers are working on plans for a large-scale killing process with gas chambers and crematoriums. Auschwitz in Poland is one of 6 extermination camps. At Auschwitz, some of the prisoners work for German industrialist I.G. Farben. The others are gassed. This is what the Nazis call the final solution. But he still must defeat Stalin. Yesterday's enemies are today's allies. An Englishman, Stafford Cripps, appointed by Churchill as ambassador to Moscow, comes to conclude a military alliance. Molotov, Stalin's shadow, reminds the Russian leader, let's not delude ourselves. The capitalists still want to kill us. but they need us. On September 30th, 1941, 3 months after the start of the German invasion, General Guderian's 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Panzer Divisions, already victorious in the Battle of France, continue their relentless march towards the Soviet capital. Moscow is in a state of panic as early snow falls on the city. Thousands of Muscovites try to flee. The administration and the diplomatic corps are evacuated, as in the Politburo, the seat of power. On October 17th, 1941, Russian journalist Leonid Timofeyev notes, "The population doesn't hide its hostile, contemptuous attitude towards its leaders. They have abandoned us. People are bitter. They feel betrayed." Stalin, however, stays put. He orders resistance to the end. The city's countless loudspeakers broadcast this song. "We will drive a bullet into the forehead of the putrid fascist vermin." Muscovites are requisitioned to build barriers. But can they stop Guderian's tanks? The last able-bodied men are mobilized. Many of them are workers from the capital's arms factories who have received orders to destroy their machines so that they don't fall into the hands of the Nazis. Few even know how to handle a rifle. But where is the Red Army? It was just defeated in Kharkiv, to the south of Moscow, on October 24th, 1941. The German newsreels show hundreds of thousands of Russian prisoners. Paradoxically, this worries the spectators. In the cinemas, they whisper to each other, "We already have restrictions and ration cards. How will we ever feed all these men?" As usual, Hitler simply lets them starve to death. He says, "We are fighting an enemy that does not consist of human beings, but of animals or beasts." Hitler arrives at his headquarters, the Wolf's Lair, near the Russian border. First, he orders a massive bombing of Moscow. The bombings take place night after night. The Muscovites take cover in the subway, the world's most beautiful subway, the People's Temple, as intended by the regime. November 6, 1941, everyone sleeping in the huge Mayakovsky station, named after the eminent Russian poet, is evicted by the police. Stalin arrives on a subway train, sheltered underground in this flowery setting, under a large bust of Lenin. Stalin wants to show everyone that the Soviet state is still standing. The Communist Party leaders who didn't flee are gathered on chairs stolen from the Bolshoi Theater. They applaud at length. One should never be the first to stop clapping. The dignitaries are there, next to the most fearsome man of all, Police Chief Beria. Stalin signals Pronin to stop clapping. Stalin's speech is highly awaited. He pessimistically states, "Comrades, after 4 months of war, I must emphasize that this danger has not only not grown less, but, on the contrary, has even increased. After a long speech, they launch into a heartfelt rendition of the Internationale, the revolutionary anthem. At dawn on November 7th, the following morning, snow and fog ground the German bomber planes. But for how long? Stalin emerges from his shelter for the cameras, only for a few minutes, just enough time to defy Hitler. It is the anniversary of the Bolshevik takeover of 1917. Meager troops march in the traditional parade before returning to combat. Safe in his shelter, Stalin rallies the masses by remembering old Tsarist heroes like Alexander Nevsky, Russia's medieval savior, conqueror of the Teutonic Knights, who had already come from across the Germanic plains. The German advance is relentless. Lieutenant August von Kaganek, tank commander of a reconnaissance unit, attests. We did not doubt our superiority. We still believed in a swift victory over the Russians, even though our numbers were greatly diminished, even if the rows of graves that lined our path were getting longer. Come on, one last effort, and we can go home. The front now is dangerously close to Moscow. But the Russian climate now comes to Stalin's rescue, exacerbating the already unrealistic German invasion plan. The weather is milder, and torrential rains pour down on the front. This is the Rasputitsa, the November rain season, also called the Sea of Mud. The German propaganda machine gladly shows these images to justify the slowing down of operations. You see, these films say, it is not the Red Army stopping us, it is the mud. The Nazi leaders begin to worry. On November 8, 1941, they meet up as they do each year in the Munich brewery where Hitler had attempted to seize power 20 years ago. Hitler comes to reassure his followers. He says, "Never before has a gigantic empire been shattered and defeated in a shorter time than the Soviet Union has been this time." However, some voices cautiously suggest that everything should be stopped and that a solution should be found. Hitler then blames Stalin for the conflict. He concludes, "The war can last as long as Stalin wants, but the last battalion on the field will be German." The first attempt on Hitler's life took place in this brewery. There will be 42 in all. Mainly bombs, which he miraculously always manages to avoid. He is especially wary of poison. No gift or food can be touched without first being tested. In his resident kitchens and headquarters, or like here at the Wolfslayer, young women are requisitioned by the SS. They are tasters earning a monthly wage, the salary of fear. In Russia, hell is icy. It does not burn, it freezes. As of November 15, 1941, after the mud, the temperature drops to -4 Fahrenheit. There are no winter uniforms. Hitler believed the Russians wouldn't last 3 weeks, but they have resisted for 5 months. General Guderian and his tanks struggle in the snow. Hitler has himself filmed at a winter equipment exhibition. How does he rationalize the ordeal of hundreds of thousands of young Germans? This shocks the Germans. How could the Fuhrer have let our soldiers face such cold in their lightweight uniforms from June 22nd? Meanwhile, the propaganda machine asks them to smile. Occupied Europe must also make its contribution. Lustra, a Brussels family business, receives a huge order for rabbit-skin jackets. This saves their workers and families from the death camps. Ribbentrop, Hitler's Minister of Foreign Affairs, and his brother-in-law, named Director of Champagne in occupied France, sets up a successful alcohol delivery to the Eastern Front. On November 25, 1941, Hitler returns to Berlin to his imposing chancellery. During a ceremony of alliance renewal, he continues to reassure he will rid the Russian soil of its inhabitants. He says, "The goal of my Eastern policy is for 100 million Germans to settle in this colonized land." The first German settlers, welcomed with great fanfare, arrive in the summer of 1941, along with the invasion. They are mostly peasants in charge of taking over the collective farms. They are shocked by the miserable, hostile environment. Hitler says, "We must get used to the idea that we should not scour the dominated population every day, nor try to instill in them a sense of German cleanliness." Children also populate Russia and its living space. Those who are deemed racially correct are rounded up from orphanages and even taken from Russian families. In Germany, another aspect of Hitler's racial policy since coming to power is the Lebensborn program, the fountain of life. The SS impregnates selected young girls to provide the Reich with future blonde, blue-eyed SS officers. The girls are subjected to the German doctrine of the 3 Ks: Kinder, Küche, and Kirche. Children, kitchen, and church. After being indoctrinated through the Hitler Youth, the boys are mobilized as auxiliaries of the Flak, the German anti-aircraft defense, attacked almost nightly by British bombers. In the cold autumn of 1941, the Germans spend their nights in shelters, praying to return home in the morning. From his train, Hitler summons his first accomplice, Germany's master of aviation and anti-aircraft defense, Reich Marshal Göring. Göring had imprudently said that no enemy aircraft would ever fly in the Reich skies. Major von Bellow, aide-de-camp, greets Göring. He recounts the meeting. Göring is very popular, therefore Hitler curbs his criticism. He only bitterly tells him, "I will have to take care of the flak cannons myself." Goering replies that all the aircraft are needed on the Eastern Front. Russia is large and its sky is immense. There are no longer enough fighters to defend the hike. One of the men in charge of Germany's aeronautical production, General Udet, commits suicide after sinking into alcoholism. He was the most famous German pilot, a World War I ace, and an aerobatics champion. Could his lavish funeral be a bad omen? Hitler will lead Germany into a world war. He hesitates for 4 days. Then he appears before the Nazi parliament. On December 11th, 1941, 6 months after invading Russia, the Führer solemnly announces that Germany is declaring war on the United States. The Reich stands in solidarity with its Japanese ally, who attacked America at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. He fires his army's chief of staff, Field Marshal von Brauchitsch, and takes his place. German soldiers are dead, wounded, captured, frozen, or missing. The following day, December 12th, 1941, Hitler receives the head of the Dutch Nazis, Anton Merzert, who recruits men for what would be called the Crusade against Bolshevism. Germany's newsreels celebrate the meeting between Hitler and Joseph Tiso, a national Catholic anti-Semitic priest. Tiso presides over Slovakia, established during Hitler's dismemberment of Czechoslovakia. Tiso promises to send soldiers to Russia. Hitler enlists the help of General Franco, who had defeated the Spanish Republic with his help. Franco cautiously refuses to engage in the war on Germany's side. He merely sends 20,000 phalangists, fanatical fascists, to Russia. These men form the Azul, or Blue Division, and fight alongside the Germans, shouting "Viva la muerte!" Long live death. Other volunteers pour in under the Nazi banner. At the Legion of French Volunteers recruitment office in Paris, ideology is not the only reason for the influx of men, young and old, over the past months. They are often unemployed, required to show a certificate proving that they are not Jews. Nazi collaboration fanatics supervise them. Before leaving, they sing the Marseillaise, surrounded by Germans. Pétain sends them this message: "Don't forget that you hold a piece of our military honor." In December 1941, 3,000 of these men in German uniforms end up in the snow on the Eastern Front. One of them, Marc Augier, writes, "Absolute despair, absolute cold. Nothing moves anymore. The birds are dead, the trees too. Men only move to perform essential functions. Any man to fall asleep dies in that position, sitting, standing, lying, or crouching." Moscow, December 1941. Word spreads that the Germans are back on the move. The last residents of Moscow, plagued by misfortune, forced to do the worst defense work, continue to be blasted with this patriotic anthem. According to the propaganda, it announces the arrival of the Soviet people's best sons, come to defend Moscow. Regiments from Siberia arrive in warm white clothes. Stalin has urgently sent them to Moscow. Vasily Grossman, the war correspondent, writes, Siberians are more stocky, more reserved, sterner. They are hunters. They are more disciplined, more used to cold and hardship. The T-34 tank, a formidable machine, appears on the scene. It is proof that Stalin's Russia has extraordinary industrial reserves. Its factories, relocated under cover far to the east, produce 200 per month. Its oblique armor is immune to anti-tank guns, making it every German soldier's nightmare. Lieutenant von Kageneck writes, we had lost our perception of absolute superiority. The Russians were infinitely better equipped than we were. We shifted from one improvisation to another. Our idea of the enemy was completely changing. Guderian's tanks reached the end of the bus line leading to Red Square, visible with binoculars. All hell suddenly breaks loose. Russia has a new weapon, a multiple rocket launcher, which the Germans nickname Stalin's organ. This weapon has a devastating effect on the German soldiers' morale. And the Russian generals, Zhukov, Konev, and Rokossovsky, launch their armies on the offensive. The Siberians attack. Heinrichi, the German general, writes, December 24th, the Russians have broken through our lines. Things are happening as in 1812. The retreat in the snow, it's just like Napoleon. High command won't accept that the army is surrounded in front of Moscow. Our leaders refuse to recognize that Russia is capable of this achievement. During the night, Hitler calls Field Marshal von Kluge for 2 hours, giving him the formal order to be killed on the spot. He sacks Guderian, but cannot prevent his troops from retreating 15, then 60 miles. The front finally settles. The Russians film the carnage of the Battle of Moscow. 300,000 Germans have been killed or wounded, and 30,000 captured. Most of them will never return. "600 miles away, at the Wolf's Lair, Hitler spends Christmas alone. Later he will say, 'Snow has been my enemy all my life. I've always hated it. It was foreshadowing.' For Hitler, spring will be the decisive moment. In the meantime, he must galvanize his people and reassure his allies. For the news cameras, he summons 3 symbolic figures. On January 4th, 1942, Goering struggles to overcome the extreme cold. Goering, the embodiment of the Nazi Party, the foundation of power. Then, one of the most important military leaders, Marshal von Bock. He is excessively thin due to a stomach ulcer and very much affected by the situation. For the camera, the Führer wants this older man to look him in the eye, stand straight, and shake his hand, smiling confidently. With General Sepp Dietrich, Hitler wants to show that the SS still protects him and is a force to be reckoned with. After 7 months of combat in Russia, Hitler looks to renew with his inspirational speeches. He says, "He who fights for the life of his people, for their daily bread, for their future, will win. The blood shed in this war must be, and it is our hope, the last in Europe for generations. May the Lord help us in this coming year." In his entourage, some dare, once again, to ask him to stop this war, including Fritz Todt, Reich Minister for Armaments and Ammunition. His plane explodes in mid-air. The day before, he had a heated confrontation with the Führer. Todt told him that Germany could not afford a long war. Hitler orders a national funeral. He is exceptionally compassionate toward the family. He replaces Todt with his favorite architect, Albert Speer. Hitler gets it right. Speer proves to be a great organizer for the war effort. He never hesitates to provide industrialists with hundreds of thousands of slaves taken from the concentration camps. The voices of dissension must be silenced. On April 20th, 1942, Hitler celebrates his birthday at the Wolf's Lair to make it clear that the war will continue. He is 53 and appears to be in great shape in the newsreels. The Germans must not know that he gets 10 shots of stimulants a day. Marshal Keitel, the servile commander-in-chief of the army, wishes him to be victorious in 1942. Goering and Himmler, of course, share this wish. But Ribbentrop, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, also suggests that they come to an agreement with Stalin. Hitler replies, "That won't be possible as long as I'm here. I might as well shoot myself in the head." In the spring, Hitler takes possession of his new headquarters, the Werewolf, in Vinnytsia, Ukraine. He hates this place, which is too hot and humid and infested with mosquitoes. He spends most of his time developing Case Blue, the great offensive of the summer of 1942 to seize Stalin's oil. The highly mechanized German army needs it to wage an extended war. In the north, Hitler orders to hold the siege of Leningrad. In the center, he succeeds in limiting the retreat of his troops. In the south, he orders his army to take Stalingrad, Crimea, and the Caucasus, towards Baku and its oil wells. Once again, against the advice of his generals, Hitler divides his forces, but the successful attacks in the south seem to prove him right. Sevastopol, Crimea's great military port, is crushed by giant cannons. The swastika floats once again over a Russian fort. Another victory for General von Manstein, who had already won the Battle of France. But Hitler appoints another general, Friedrich Paulus, to lead the offensive on Stalingrad. This is a doubly symbolic gesture. Paulus participated in the Barbarossa plan. He will erase the shame of the Moscow defeat by taking Stalingrad, Stalin's city. Paulus is in charge of the 6th Army, reputed to be the Wehrmacht's most powerful unit. The Lancers, the infantrymen, have been marching for 1,200 miles. Over a decade, they have grown up in the Hitler Jugend, the Hitler Youth, which has turned them into fanatics. They were humiliated by the Moscow defeat and the loss of so many of their elders. Now they too want their revenge. But as in Moscow, they didn't count on the Russians being so resistant. The Germans launched their Stuka dive bombers, which leveled the model city of Stalingrad, the pride of the Soviet regime. The Stukas also destroy the main industrial centers, like the T-34 tank production lines inside the tractor plant and the Red October factory. However, the carcasses of twisted steel and city ruins become fortresses for the Russians. They provide shelter for snipers, like Vasily Zaitsev, who kills 225 German soldiers, according to the official story. Inside this hellhole, people fight with knives, even with sharpened shovels. They cut each other up in the cellars and sewers. And the months go by. Until the relentless winter returns. The Russians surround the Germans again. And sweep away Hitler's allies, the Hungarians, Romanians, and Italians, who had been protecting Stalingrad center, occupied by the Germans. On Christmas Day 1942, Hitler orders Manstein's army, further south, to come help the 6th Army. On December 29th, 30 miles from Stalingrad, Manstein is stopped by superior Russian forces. For a month, Goering, who had bragged about supplying the troops under siege, mobilizes all available transport planes. They are not equipped for below freezing temperatures, and the Russian fighters shoot down half of them. The few who manage to fly over the entrenched camp provide the very weak troops with barely 7 ounces of bread a day. On January 10th, 1943, Paulus gives the orders to eat the horses. After 7 months of fierce combat, the Germans have run out of everything. No ammunition, no hope. Paulus signs the Sixth Army's surrender to the Russians. Hitler, who is fully to blame, dares to judge those who obeyed him. He comments, "The old commanders threw themselves on their swords when they saw that the cause was lost." And he adds, "I curse myself for having risked this war with such bad generals." The Russians captured 24 German generals, along with 2,500 officers and 100,000 survivors of the Sixth Army. Stalingrad remains one of the bloodiest battles in history. Stalin's Russia lost over 1 million men. Goebbels writes in his diary, "The Führer seems to have aged 15 years. In April 1943, a wave of hope sweeps through Rotterdam, Liège, Bordeaux, Belgrade, and Copenhagen. Despite the hardships, the fear, and the German occupation, the news of Hitler's defeat in Stalingrad fills hearts with joy. No, the Nazis are not invincible. The past year has been a dark one for the Germans. Their Japanese allies, initially victorious, were defeated in the Pacific. The Americans sank the Japanese aircraft carriers at Midway, and their famous Zero fighters had to land miserably on the ocean. In the Battle of the Desert, General Rommel, sick and weakened, was defeated by British forces in El Alamein, Egypt. Simultaneously, the Americans and the British landed in North Africa to prepare for the European invasion.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
Hitler regains his strength at the Berghof, his Berchtesgaden chalet. His determination is back. He declares, "Persistence is the secret to success." On July 5th, 1943, he prepares to launch the Tigers and the Panthers, his new armored monsters, against the Soviets. He targets their weak link of defense at Kursk in central Russia. Once again, Hitler is about to unleash the apocalypse.